In so many ways, the Sega Dreamcast felt like it was gesturing towards the future, ahead of its time, pushing the boundaries of technology to new frontiers in gaming. But just as often, it was looking backwards, to its recent past, to find a lot of much more simple, straightforward action games off the PC. Two of my least favorite works on this project so far have been the two shooters published by Rage Software, Expendable and Incoming, both of which are very basic, meat and potatoes, alright kids, go mash that fire button and don't come back until supper, PC port shooters that were sunk by wonky controls and repetitive gameplay. Expendable especially was a pretty egregious example of a twin-stick shooter in a single-stick world, which made it something of a miserable experience. Slave Zero is also a basic, repetitive shooter that needs two sticks to really function properly and has a controller with one, but developer Infogrames North America has a history of finding unique solutions to complicated problems. Infogrames North America spent most of their existence as Accolade, begun by Activision founders Alan Miller and Bob Whitehead. The company found great success and acclaim with well-liked sports and racing franchises like Hardball and Test Drive, as well as computer adventure and strategy games like Star Control. In the early 90s, they tracked a shift back to console gaming, but Sega had a licensing deal in place that made producing games for the Genesis either prohibitively expensive for third-party developers or limited their ability to produce for other systems. Accolade discovered a trick to reverse engineer games to get around Genesis licensing security lockouts and illicitly produce games for the system. In 1991, Sega sued Accolade, who initially lost but subsequently won on appeal under a settlement decision that they would create several Genesis console exclusives in a short time frame. Even as they won the ruling, the initial injunction proved catastrophic to Accolade's bottom line, and they cycled through several CEOs and publishing philosophies, settling on Jim Barnett, who pushed the company to expand franchise IP. Trying to find their own company mascot a la Mario or Sonic, Accolade found success with the sassy bobcat, Bubsy, but after a few lackluster 16-bit sequels, pushed for a 3D expansion, and put out Bubsy 3D in 1996, which ended up being historically considered as one of the worst games ever made. For how ugly it was, how bad it controlled, and how deeply annoying the relentless voice acting for the titular character was.
Oh, look! An arrow! Aren't these game designers wonderful? Giving you a guidepost to help you find your way? How convenient!
Coincidentally, Bubsy was voiced by Lonnie Minella, who we've heard before on this project, as the voice of Janine King in Blue Stinger.
His name is Dogs Bauer. He's a captain of the SS cargo Deanna.
By 1999, Accolade unfortunately couldn't pull themselves out of a nosedive, despite renewed success with the Test Drive franchise, and they were sold wholesale to the French publisher Infogrames, and the very first game released under Accolade's new branding of Infogrames North America was Slave Zero. Slave Zero is a giant robot mech shooter, which tells a convoluted, slapdash story set 500 years in the future about a sinister Chinese overlord named the Sov Khan, who rules the planet thanks to 60-foot-tall bipedal robots called, slaves. An ancient order of warriors known as the Guardians have captured a slave and downloaded themselves into it, and now he's fighting the other slaves to take back Earth or whatever. You play this giant robot, and you're stomping through urban landscapes with cars and people underfoot, aiming your rockets at all the other mechs and Avas bounding about. Slave Zero's clever control solution to the single-stick problem is just to double up on the controller function for their own designs. The analog stick works the angles for the camera, and the face buttons are actually the motor that moves the robot forward and back, left and right. The shoulder triggers work the rockets and the bullets. It is initially pretty cumbersome, but as I spent more time with it, it starts feeling shockingly manageable, and comes off as a genuinely nifty solution to a difficult problem. One they didn't even get sued for, even with some awkward reticule positioning seemingly designed with the mouse in mind. Aesthetically, the game is a mixed bag. The fidelity of the graphics is pretty solid, and the game had its own custom engine known as the Ecstasy engine developed specifically for it, which is cool. But also, it is the only game to ever use the Ecstasy engine. And the game sometimes suffers frame rate hiccups, even with its drab, expendable-esque color palette and mostly empty streets. The PC version seems to do a lot better when it comes to scale, with a lot more human-sized motorists ambling around. I have basically no familiarity with mech games, but this definitely bears a resemblance to From Software's 1997 classic, Armored Core. But that game seems to be as much a meticulous tech customization sim as it is a shooty-shoots robot game. Slave Zero is unequivocally a shooty-shoots robot game, for better and for worse. If you go to any point of this game, it pretty much just looks and feels like this. Many critics took it to task at the time for feeling too repetitive. Jeff Durham of All Game Guide even joked that his recommendation was to just play the demo 30 times in a row, and you'd get the experience of playing the entire game for free. But honestly, there's been so few games on the Dreamcast so far that just let you go and pew 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 without serious reservations. So once I got acclimated to its quirky control scheme, I had a good time zoning out and shooting stuff. The game doesn't feel artificially hard and is fairly generous with health and weapon re-ups. And whatever its issues, it did what it needed to do to keep me engaged for the time I had it. This is not a genre I seek out, and I probably won't revisit this one in the future. But for its audience, I think it works. And hell, last summer there was, of all things, a prequel to this game, Slave Zero X, released to Steam. So clearly there is an audience. And I think for what they had to work with, Slave Zero is about as good as it could be. Next time, as everyone knows, the only treatment for a medieval witch's curse is a delicious cooked chicken.